Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Monday, April 6th, 2026, and today we're going to talk potatoes to complement the video you all saw the other week. We'll talk pre-filling trays and growing under spruces and pines. So let's do it. Spruces and pines. All right, happy Monday, family. I hope everyone had a nice weekend and a nice Easter holiday. Ours was what they typically are in the spring, soccer and hanging out every weekend. It's pretty much it. It is also spring break for the kiddos here, so we're also dutifully pretending we're at a beach. Farming is not the easiest job to just be like, well, I'm going to go take a week off in the spring. No big deal. So we tried to make it fun for the kids, but there's always, just a lot going on this time of year, including a little cold snap after a pretty warm few days, followed by a few more warm days. How and when to cover the plants is not an easy one to explain to a house sitter. So we can't really just be like, hey, could you watch our house for a little while? Oh, speaking of me, just rambling about stuff, Wednesday morning, I will be going live at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So make sure to bring your questions here to YouTube. As always, haven't done one of those in a little while because of the whole, voice thing, but Wednesday will be a good day for it. And as always, before we dive into today's show, send in your 20-second farm video clips. You don't have to do that before we dive into the show, but I'm going to mention it before we dive in the show. You get it. Send those to farmermike@notillgrowers.com. Love seeing those as always. We thank you. Okay, so also as always, on Mondays, we do a total breakdown of a crop. And this week, I wanted to focus on potatoes as a follow-up to the silent video that Mike and I made for you a couple weeks back. If you have not seen that video, that's okay. I will describe much of it here and we'll replay some of the footage, but it is there if you'd like to watch it in its entirety, and it just follows me through the whole potato planting process this year. Anyway, I've done potato planting segments on the show before, and maybe even a whole potato show, but I wanted to describe this year's potato situation because it's a little bit unique, a little bit different than any I've faced in recent years, in that I planted these potatoes in a plot I had largely allowed to go fallow last year as I'm transitioning to perennials and shrinking our garden. But I needed a little extra space this spring. I kind of overshot a little bit there, or undershot, I guess, depending on how you look at shrinking a garden. So I needed a little extra space this spring, and I also needed to renegotiate how the plot was laid out a little bit for drainage reasons. So when we hit a warm, dry spell this January after Christmas, I checked the soil at about 8 inches down and realized I could actually plow this up and restart it and have it ready to plant by, March. My first potato plantings are typically in early to mid-March here in Kentucky Zone 6B. So perhaps this was a bit on the earlier end, but once I have the potatoes, and if I have the time in that moment, I like to just get the job done and out of the way. Now, back to January, I tested all the soil moisture throughout the plot by rubbing the soil between my fingers, as I always do, and making sure no smearing was happening. Smearing is a sign that you will cause compaction, so we were good to go there. Also, I later saw that my buddy Pavel at Pavel's Garden near Louisville was working up some new ground as well that week, so I felt like I wasn't crazy to be doing that in January. Anyway, I first added some amendments, plowed it up with the rotary plow, formed the beds, and then covered it with a tarp to reduce the risk of erosion. Ideally, this tarp would have been on for like 6 months through both a cold and a warm period, but the weed situation wasn't terrible in that area, save for one spot that had some lingering crabgrass. More on what I did / am doing there in the grassy section at a later date. But in terms of soil prep, that was kind of it. That was the whole, of the bed prep. Just amendments, plow it up, get the beds ready, cover it with the tarp. For those curious why I plowed, though, one, it was a section that I felt was a little bit compacted from previous land use, has been for years, which I tested with rebar. And two, without good, trustworthy mulch there, especially, not midwinter, I couldn't really just do like any sort of straight up no-till situation. And again, I also wanted to change it up slightly the way the angle of the beds were for a little bit of better drainage to accommodate what will eventually be more perennial. So basically setting it up for long-term success. So plowing was my only real option there. In theory, I will not have to do that ever again in that area, but sometimes plans change or just, you learn more about your soil and your situation. In those situations, I like to quote unquote beg forgiveness from the soil with good compost, cover crops, and mulches if and when I find some trustworthy mulches like the leaves, etc. That way I can repair what damage I wrought by tilling it up with those please forgive me gifts. Potatoes, I should say, are also one crop that I just don't love the results in general as much when I do them completely no-till. Not saying it can't be done or done successfully, just that in my context, I have yet to get a yield from a completely no-till potato that comes anywhere close to what I get from, like a small amount of disturbance. As you may recall, how I normally do potatoes is I often take a no-till bed and still dig a really deep furrow in it. So that would be a lower disturbance than what I did here, obviously, but not nothing. Potatoes thrive in their recovery species roles, so I don't mind getting a really nice deep furrow and then covering that with soil and then kind of hilling it up as they grow. Now, for the actual potatoes, I always begin like 24 hours before I plan to plant by starting my JMS liquid, or the microbes as I call them simply in the video. JMS is the Jadam microorganism solution, just a very simple microbial brew that the first year I used it, I did not see a single potato beetle, and the plants looked exquisite. So I've kind of just adopted it as part of my process. After several years of using it now, I still have not had any significant potato beetle issues, though last year I did have some potato beetle issues on a few plants, but in general, by and large, I've not had an issue. So I'm not saying it's a cure-all, just that I've enjoyed a good crop response. I've described JMS, or again, Jadam microorganism solution before, but it's like rainwater, baked potatoes smashed up, compost, and a pinch of forest or garden soil. Basically, I put the soil and the potatoes in a bag, rest those in water, and let that sit overnight on a heat mat. That heat mat will get it to the temperature I kind of need it to, more like room temperature. And like you can see in the video, it's like somewhat bubbly the very next day and smells just like the beginnings of a very light beer. And that's how, at least I know that I've succeeded. That mixture will be lightly drizzled on at planting, which we will discuss in the third segment. For cutting the potatoes, the easiest rule of thumb there is just to leave at least 2 eyes per cut. There are nuances to it based on the size. Like you kind of want bigger chunks. Those will give you bigger potatoes. But if you follow that recipe, you should be good to go. Then I put those in a basket overnight in a slightly cooler than room temperature room. Nothing too cold. Warm is fine. I notably don't chit or sprout them in general. I planted some of those chitted ones you can see there from some potatoes I grew last year. But I've just not found a ton of research to really suggest that chitting them makes a consistently huge difference in terms of yield or disease or pests or really anything but emergence speed. It can, for sure, and sometimes it does, depending on the variety and climate, etc. But sometimes it doesn't really, and chitting is just more work for maybe they will do better. So yeah, I let them heal overnight, and then they're ready to plant. Typically, I want to plant them within a few days of cutting, so I only cut them, the potato pieces, the chunks, if I'm sure they are good to go. If not, and it rains or something happens, then I chit them because what other choice do I have, or why not? Just set them on trays in a warm, lit, but not scorchingly lit area. And then when your soil is ready, you are ready to plant them. Anyway, that's the soil prep stuff and the potato chitting stuff. In the third segment, we'll tackle the planting stuff. But first, a little break with some pines, spruces, and dry soil mix. I make some weird cocktails, y'all, but we'll be right back. Maybe it's called the Be Right Back. Maybe it's called the BRB. Maybe you should, I don't know. I don't think you should probably drink that with the dry soil mix in there.
Hey there, this is Lee in Zone 7B, North Carolina. I just thought it might be interesting for some people to see a row of daikon radish after the winter and just how interesting they are after they've gone through the winter. They just form this fibrous material, and you can kind of see how they would be good at helping break up soil. And then how easy it actually is to remove them from the bed.
Today's episode is brought to you by Grown By. Grow smarter with Grown By, the farmer-owned cooperative. Grown By is the platform for online sales of everything: custom and traditional CSAs, halves of beef, flower bouquets, wholesale to restaurants, and now Grown By supports in-person sales too. Their new app, Grown By Register, you can supercharge your market and farm stand, finally bringing together your online and offline sales and customer data. Grown By is proud to make local food accessible by processing SNAP benefits online and in person right within the app. Grown By helps you put your best food forward. Schedule a demo at coop.grownby.com/no-till. That's coop.grownby.com/no-till. All right, back to the show. If you, the listener or viewer, are enjoying this podcast, getting even a small amount of value from it, consider supporting our work over at patreon.com/no-till-growers. I will try to get to questions from everywhere that questions come in, but I will always get to your Patreon questions. Now, today's first Patreon question, we're going to try to do 2 every day in this middle section until we're caught up on Patreon questions a little bit, comes from Patreon member Scott Fries, who asks, quote, I have a friend that is starting up permaculture beds in his yard. He has quite a few large spruce and white pines. What, if any, edible plants would do well within this soil? On another note, what plants may benefit from the pine straw as a mulch? Thanks, as always, Farmer Jesse, end quote. All right, thanks, Scott. Interesting question. Well, some of what will work in that situation will depend on the climate there, the amount of sunlight, etc. Many edible plants can work nearby spruce trees, but if there is no sunlight, it's going to be tough to grow many edible plants or woodland flowers that aren't just like medicinal plants. There are plenty of people who grow crops near trees like those, but again, shade and space and climate make a huge difference in terms of what will be productive. Honestly, the best thing to do in that situation is just chat with like a native plant nursery nearby and see what they think might work best for those areas. There are some, like ferns and bulb plants like daffodils that could do okay in pretty shady areas, azaleas and rhododendrons as well, but not like edible stuff. But mixing in some native flowering shrubs as well would be cool and perhaps more well-suited. It'd be good for bugs and maybe some cut flowers and that sort of thing. In terms of fruits, blueberries feel like the obvious answer. Those service berries may work as well, and maybe some pawpaws, depending on where you are. But again, see what the native plant nurseries think first and then go from there. If you want to mix in some stuff that they know they like, such as blueberries, because what maniac doesn't love a blueberry, I think that's good to go. To the pine straw part of the question, pine straw is pretty fine pretty much anywhere you would use mulch. It's not as acidifying as people think it is, especially not deep into the soil. However, it can acidify a little bit right there on the surface, so you don't want to put it around things that are really shallow rooted. Preferably, any woody mulches are mixed up with other tree species, but longer season crops will benefit from the pine mulch either way. So I guess I hope that's helpful, and others can feel empowered to chime in as well in the comment section. But sometimes in some situations, the best answer is just, someone in your area will know better than I could. Our second Patreon question of the day comes to us from Feed Me Tomatoes Farm, that's a fun name, who asks, hello, I have a wonderful friend offering to help me pre-fill seed trays for spring planting. I invest in a good seed starting mix with lots of mycorrhizae, organic humus, and natural fertilizers. Does your inner soil nerd think that this is a terrible idea, or will all my good soil bits survive a dry spell in trays using a blend of wind strips and traditional trays? Thanks bunches, end quote. All right, great question here. This seems to come up in one way or another every season, but it's an interesting idea. The goal is here, presumably, is to save time, but would it hurt production? So for me, ideally, the mix is best kept in the bag where it's, stays mildly moist and active. By filling those trays early, you will lose some of the diversity when it dries out fully. You could also lose a little bit of the carbon in the peat moss. Presumably it has peat moss when that fully dries out. Of course, you could always reconstitute the trays with compost tea or extracts. That would, help with the reestablishing of the microbial activity. Moreover, some of the microbes will go dormant, so they'll come back to life when they are reignited. Is that the right word? Moistened, hydrated, bingo. Now, on a technical level, having a bunch of field trays is also going to take up a lot of room. Maybe that isn't an issue, but it's just something that has to be considered. Moreover, if they get knocked over somehow, that could make for a pretty huge mess and a waste. So you'd have to make sure to keep that sort of thing in mind, like where you're going to keep them, how you're going to keep them safe. I don't immediately see issues with that idea beyond the loss of microbial diversity and potentially carbon, plus storage challenges and risks. If it helps speed things up for you, then you can give it a try. At least I wouldn't do all of my trays that way, but you could start with a handful. Stuff will grow as long as there is, moisture there and you plant your seeds at the right depths and cover them and all that stuff. Whether the plant will lose the vigor and health, that I'm not sure about. It will depend a lot on how dry they ultimately become and for how long. Anyway, great questions. As always, you all, we will keep trying to work our way through these Patreon questions throughout the next, month or so as best we can to get caught up. Appreciate your patience there. Okay, so one last break, and then we're back to potatoes. Be right back to potatoes, but you already knew that. Yep. Today's episode is brought to you by Rimmel Greenhouses.
Whether it's tomatoes to market, flowers in the spring, or your family's harvest, growing in a greenhouse protected from the weather provides the right environment that you need for a harvest that you can count on. Rimmel Greenhouses are designed for durability and offer the quality that you need to grow productively year-round. Visit rimmelgreenhouses.com to get a quote today.
If I may editorialize for a second, I own a Rimmel tunnel. I love it. We built it ourselves, and I really appreciated the quality of the tunnel as well as the customer service we received in the process, so make sure to check them out. Today's episode is also brought to you by Good Agriculture. Good Agriculture handles farm bookkeeping and tax filing, so there is no scrambling at tax time. They keep your books clean and up to date and show you where your farm's finances stand. If you're behind, they'll get you caught up. They also help farmers find funding and stay ahead of grant deadlines. You run the farm, they help the business. Learn more at goodagriculture.com/info. That's goodagriculture.com/info. All right, back to the show. All right, so in this year's planting, I had 3 beds that were okay and 1 or 2 beds that were meh with some grasses still remaining after the plowing and the tarping. Now, a responsible grower would have, well, never put themselves in that position to have 2 mad beds, but would maybe just not plant those beds, would mulch them heavily, responsible stuff, that sort of thing. But not me. Instead, I decided to go ahead and plant them for 2 reasons. One, I planned to retarp after the planting, which would further wear out the grasses. And 2, I'll have to cultivate them like I've already done before I go ahead and start putting down the mulches. Or at least that's the hope. But usually I would not plant potatoes into poorly prepared ground like that. It's just asking for disaster. Generally though, the process, assuming the beds are all good to go, is to dig the furrow about 8 or so inches deep, if possible, sow the potato pieces about 8 to 10 inches apart. And then I did something a little bit different this year. Often I walk on top of all the chunks just to press them deep into the soil, but it feels like a little counterproductive in terms of decompacting the soil. And it's also kind of slow and awkward. So this year I just moved the shoe on my earthway seeder up and out of the way. And then I used the earthway seeder to simply run over the potato chunks and press them into the ground. It moved a few of the potato chunks around for sure, especially the bigger ones, but it was strangely effective. Then I sowed some chunky but finished compost over top and drizzled that microbial mix over top of that. The idea here is that I just want a good burst of nitrogen and beneficial microbes right there at where the plants will start, right out of the gate. That area was also fairly well amended with alfalfa meal, so it should have some good long-term nitrogen as well. Then I covered all the plants in the furrow, and last, I pulled the tarp back on to warm the soil and kill more weeds. But most importantly, keep the soil in place. Now, it is my aim this year to get away from tarping, but one thing I'm realizing is that there is going to have to be some thoughtful redesign because the tarp is essentially an employee for me who is weeding the soil all the time and keeping it in place. So if I'm serious about getting away from plastics, I've got to get even more serious about finding mulches that I can trust. Trust they won't be contaminated is my biggest issue, frankly, but also things like weed seeds. And then employing those instead. Now, on the mulch thing, obviously, as I said last week, I'm working with leaves at the moment, which is not ideal because the spring winds are unrelenting. They love my work. They just want to play with it, throw it around a little bit. But in general, I need just many more mulching options. Gas prices are going up. In some places, they are up by as much as 30% or more in the last few weeks. If that trend holds in the summer, which it very well could because wars are dumb and take significantly longer than leaders seem to think they will, if that happens, prices on mulch will go up. Straw, hay, compost, it will all go up. And when that happened in 2021, the price of mulch did not ever come back down. Once the bales get to a certain price, they are not likely to retreat. So mulches could get a little iffy this year. And unfortunately, the grass mulches that I love are often harder to find this time of year. So that's, it just can be a little bit complicated, especially with those early potato plantings. And again, because gas prices are up, with that rise, so too goes the price of hauling bales. So anyway, when mulch gets expensive, it can dramatically cut into your ability to actually make money on a crop, especially a crop like potatoes, which is decidedly not in the top level of profitability anyway. So yeah, it's time to get creative and take care of the soil, but not cost an arm and a leg to do so. And I will walk you all through how we solve that problem as we explore it this season. Otherwise, that's the gist on our potato planting this year. Let me know what your questions you have about your potato planting or my potato planting process. It changes a bit every year for us just based on the conditions, but I'll keep you all updated on how it goes. Otherwise, don't forget, No Till Growers is a nonprofit 501c3, so donations are tax deductible and greatly appreciated. Please make sure to like and subscribe and or follow wherever you're getting this podcast. That's an easy way to help us out as well. There's also, I think it's on this side, one of these sides, is a donation thing. If anything we ever say in here is helpful to you, you can just kick in a few bucks to say thank you. They're on YouTube. Enormous thank you to all of our show sponsors. And if you'd ever like to sponsor the show, you can reach out to Farmer Michelle at notillgrowers.com. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music, Mike Hilbert for the production help and editing, and my wife Hannah for absolutely everything in the world. Also, shouts to Epidemic Sound for the background music that you can hear. Pick up a hat like this one, or a copy of my book, The Living Soul Handbook, at no-tillgrowers.com to support our work. I don't sell that book through our own website, like through my farm website. I sell it entirely through No-Till Growers so that we can raise as much money for this project as we can. So anytime you buy it from us, it's just donating to the, whatever No-Till Growers is doing in that moment. So big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/no-tillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, or you sign up in the month of April, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs today to Sean Mooney. I love Moonies. That's always fun to say. Sorry, Sean. And Rybird. Shouts to you all, 2 new earthworms. That's fun. In this week's story, it turns out dreams actually become realities. Like, literally they do. What I mean is that there's a dimension, a universe of sorts, infinite in size and constantly growing, where everything that everyone dreams is created. Every dream, be it a child's and adults and animals, every dream is turned into a reality. And when we sleep, we visit those realities. Sometimes we just kind of create them and then move on or wake up, but sometimes we revisit old realities. But for the characters in those dreams, in those dream worlds, they are very real and they stay there forever. Like I said, sometimes they are visited again and again by the creators, which helps with the loneliness issue, but sometimes they are just created and never revisited, never completed. It's just these kind of weird little blank worlds. This, of course, was a huge, horrifying discovery for Tom with an H, why not, who now has to figure out how to tell the people of the world about his discovery. But first, he had to get proof, and that is for tomorrow on Follow Your Dreams. Okay, all right. Thanks for watching and/or listening. We'll see you then. Bye.